You learned about the invention of paper money in school. You were told it was a European story, a story about banks, about the Bank of England, about the rise of modern finance. That story is a lie by omission. 800 years before Europe printed its first banknote, merchants in Sichuan, China created paper money called jiaozi during the northern Song Dynasty. The advent of jiaozi predates the emergence of paper money in other regions of the world by 6 centuries. China achieved remarkable economic growth by pre-modern standards, by relying on a different set of political and economic institutions from those that emerged in medieval and early modern Europe, one of which was its distinctive monetary system, including the early development of fiat currency in the form of paper bills. Paper money did not make China rich. It made China the extraction point for every dynasty that controlled the printing press. The Song, the Yuan, the Ming, 3 dynasties, 3 experiments, 3 collapses. Same cause every time. This is Noob Historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. Here is why this matters to you right now, today, in your life. The U.S. national debt is approaching record levels as a share of gross domestic product and stands at 100% of GDP, while interest costs are surging to new records and budget deficits remain elevated at around 6% of GDP. The 2026 deficit is projected to hit $1.9 trillion and grow to $3.1 trillion in 2036. America's slow-moving debt crisis shows no signs of waning. The pattern you're about to see played out in China for 500 years. Governments print money, citizens lose purchasing power, trust evaporates, the currency dies, and the people who understood the warning signs were the only ones who protected their wealth. Your government knows this history. It is repeating it anyway. To understand how the world's first paper currency was born, you need to understand one physical problem. Iron coins were absurdly heavy. The primary currency in circulation during the northern Song Dynasty was copper coins valued at a mere 1 yuan. And in Sichuan, the situation was exacerbated by the prevalence of iron coins, which had even less value and were more cumbersome to transport and store. This inconvenience affected local authorities, merchants, and ordinary people alike. The advent of jiaozi was an imperative solution to these challenges. In contrast to the heavy iron coins used as the common currency in Sichuan, paper was much lighter and was issuable with high denominations, like 1,000 qian, an amount weighing no less than several pounds in metal. Imagine conducting business with a wheelbarrow of iron. That was daily life for Sichuan merchants in the 10th century, so they solved it themselves. The design of the notes was standardized by the 16 largest merchant houses of Sichuan, and they decided to found a paper note bank issuing a common set of bill forms. These private paper notes were acknowledged by the local government as an official means of payment. Pay attention to the origin. Paper money was born from the private sector, from trade, from need. Paper money originated in the private sector. At the end of the 10th century, financial firms in Sichuan in western China began to issue paper money known as jiaozi in return for deposits of coin, silk, and other assets. Merchants backed each note with real deposits. You walked into a jiaozi shop with iron coins. You walked out with lightweight paper. You could redeem that paper at any participating shop. Holders of metal currency could deposit their money at any of the jiaozi shops to exchange for jiaozi, and they could also request cash redemption at any jiaozi shop. Trust was built on convertibility. Every note had a metal foundation under it. Then something shifted. Due to changes in economic conditions or fraud, some wealthy merchants were unable to repay their losses, and some paper currency could not be redeemed. This triggered a credit crisis, which ended the practice of private individuals issuing jiaozi. The private system cracked, and the government saw an opening. In the winter of 1023, the government saw that issuing jiaozi was profitable, and under the pretext of resolving continuous disputes among merchants, it officially established a Ministry of Jiaozi Affairs and introduced fairly exhaustive regulations and requirements. Read that sentence again. The government took control of the money supply because it saw profit. The stated reason was public order. The real incentive was revenue. This is the moment the machinery shifted from serving commerce to serving the state. After efforts to regulate private paper bills failed, in 1023, the Song government took over the issue of jiaozi as state-issued paper currency. Under government auspices, jiaozi soon became the dominant money in the Sichuan region, largely displacing coin. And for a while, it worked. The success of the Song paper currencies was attributed to government policies designed to maintain equilibrium between different forms of money. Although paper bills were inconvertible with metallic monies, if the market value of its paper currency faltered, the Song state intervened to buy up excess bills using its reserve of silver bullion, thus restoring public confidence in their worth. 2. The Song government enforced discipline. They held reserves. They managed supply. When the paper lost value, they propped it up with real silver. This worked for decades. It was the gold standard of paper money management, centuries before anyone in Europe even understood the concept. Then war came. In the 13th century, threats of invasion by the steppe nomad kingdoms to the north, including from 1234, the Mongol Confederation, compelled the Song to issue exorbitant quantities of paper currency to pay for rising military costs. Although paper currency suffered severe depreciation, it became even more deeply entrenched in the private economy. By the time of the Mongol conquest of Song in 1276, paper money had become the monetary standard of the Chinese economy. This is the first repetition of the pattern. A government inherits a sound monetary system. It faces a military threat. It prints money to fund defense. The currency loses value. The government prints more to compensate. The spiral begins. The root cause of this inflation was attributed to the fact that the Song government did not back their paper money up with a sufficient number of coins. The numbers tell the story in brutal clarity. Despite there only being around 700,000 iron cash coins in circulation, around 3,180,000 Asimov banknotes were in circulation, which rose to $440,000 in 1204, an additional $300,000 mint in banknotes were issued, at which point between 400 and as low as 100 cash coins were accepted per 1 mint of paper currency, with a face value of 1,000 coins cash. Break that down. A note with a face value of 1,000 coins traded for 100 coins. The paper lost 90% of its value, and the Song government's response was to print more. Local governments, such as the Sichuanese government, had to sell off tax exemption certificates, silver, gold, and titles of its offices because of the inflationary policies around paper money. The government sold titles and tax exemptions to raise revenue because its own money was collapsing. Bureaucrats sold access to power because the printing press had devoured the treasury. The infrastructure of governance became a marketplace of desperation. During the reign of Emperor Renzong Qingli, the Yizhou Jiaozi Affairs Ministry issued 600 million in Jiaozi in Shanxi to pay for food for humans and horses, without maintaining any reserve. Previously, the regular reissuing of paper currency had created a barrier to inflation, because the new currency value was pegged to the old currency it was replacing. The government's abuse of credit led to Jiaozi becoming a tool for accumulating wealth. Without reserves, Jiaozi lost its circulation function and its value. 600 million in paper, printed to feed an army, with zero reserves behind it. The discipline that had made Jiaozi work for decades was gone. The bottleneck that protected the currency, convertibility, had been removed. What remained was a tool of extraction, not exchange. The Song Dynasty fell to the Mongols in 1276, but the monetary rot preceded the military collapse by decades. The army the Song was printing money to fund could not save them because the money they printed to fund it had already hollowed out the economy underneath. War did not destroy the Song monetary system. The Song monetary system destroyed itself funding the war. When the Mongols conquered China, they inherited the most sophisticated monetary system on earth, and they took it further than anyone before them. The Yuan Dynasty was the first political regime to introduce a precious metal standard and deploy paper money as the sole legal tender. The Mongol rulers of China went so far as to ban the use of bronze coins and silver in trade, relying solely on paper money. Read that again. An entire empire of tens of millions of people running on paper. No coins, no metal. Pure paper. This was the 1260s. Europe was still trading with chunks of silver. In the early 13th century, following the conquering of North China, the Mongols introduced the silver standard, the first precious metal standard backing paper money in history. When Kublai established Mongol dominance over Mongolia, China, and Korea, founding the Yuan Empire in 1271, he announced that silver-backed paper money was the sole legal tender. From then on, a paper money economy, backed by silver, replaced a previously chaotic monetary system that mixed various types of paper money with copper coins, iron coins, and silver ingots. Marco Polo arrived in China during this period. What he saw stunned him. Paper money was introduced as a new idea to Western civilization by Marco Polo in a chapter of his travels, entitled How the Great Khan Causes the Bark of Trees, Made into Something Like Paper, to Pass for Money All Over His Country. Polo described Kublai Khan's monetary system with the awe of a man watching something he believed to be impossible. The emperor's mint, then, is in the same city of Kambaluk, and the way it is wrought is such that you might say he has the secret of alchemy and perfection, and you would be right. Alchemy, the turning of base material into gold. Polo saw mulberry bark transformed into money and believed he was witnessing sorcery. The Khan causes every year to be made such a vast quantity of this money, which cost him nothing, that it must equal in amount all the treasure of the world. It costs him nothing. Polo identified the core danger in a single sentence, 700 years before any central banker would admit it. Money that costs nothing to produce has no natural limit on production. The only constraint is the discipline of the person holding the press, and the Mongols, to their credit, understood this at first. There were abundant reserves, such as metals and other valuables, stored in warehouses to back the issuance of the paper money. Among these, silver was the most important, as people could convert paper money to silver only by paying a 3% commission on the exchange. To increase the demand for paper money, all taxes were required to be paid using zhongtong chao. They held silver reserves. They allowed convertibility. They denominated taxes in paper to create demand. And the Yuan government was prudent in expanding the quantity of money, especially when the miserable memories of hyperinflation from the end of the Jin Dynasty were still fresh. The system held. When dividing the entire period into three subperiods, 1260 to 1290, 1290 to 1340, and 1340 to 1355, the corresponding inflation rates were 4.5%, 1.8%, and 11%, as measured by the respectability CPI. For over half a century, inflation stayed moderate, less than 2% annually from 1290 to 1340. By modern standards, that is textbook monetary policy. The Mongols ran tighter money than most modern central banks for 50 years in the 13th century. Then the fiscal pressure arrived. The Yuan dynasty's monetary collapse did not happen overnight. It unfolded in 3 stages, and those stages map onto the modern era with disturbing precision. In early 13th century China, the Mongols introduced the silver standard, the first paper money in history to be backed by a precious metal. This column studies the rise and fall of paper money in 13th and 14th century China over 3 stages: full silver convertibility, nominal silver convertibility, and fiat standard. Stage 1, full silver convertibility, 1260 to 1276. Paper money backed by silver. Citizens could walk into exchange bureaus and redeem notes for metal. People could exchange paper money for silver at a discount of 70% to 80% of face value, bring damaged notes, and obtain new notes in exchange by paying a small commission fee of 3%. The system had a physical anchor. Confidence was rooted in substance. Stage 2, nominal silver convertibility, 1276 to 1310. From 1276, the money was not fully backed by silver. The guarantee existed on paper. Silver reserves shrank. The government still claimed convertibility, but fulfilling redemptions became harder. The government misappropriated metal reserves for the purpose of funding deficits. It issued more paper monies than could be supported by reserves to obtain seigniorage revenue. Stage 3, pure fiat, 1310 to 1368. In 1311, these 2 paper currencies were reissued after being discontinued, but were no longer guaranteed or backed by silver. The monetary system had changed to de jure fiat money, which would last a full 40 years. Now trace the modern parallel. Before 1933, the US dollar was fully convertible to gold. Citizens could walk into a bank and exchange paper for metal. Full convertibility. From 1944 to 1971, under Bretton Woods, the dollar was convertible to gold for foreign governments only. Nominal convertibility. The anchor existed in theory but was restricted in practice. After August 15, 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, the dollar became pure fiat. No backing, no anchor, no constraint except the discipline of the Federal Reserve. 3 stages, full backing, partial backing, no backing. The Yuan dynasty traveled this path over 108 years. The United States traveled it over 38 years. The destination was the same both times. The speed was different. Back in Yuan China, the consequences arrived. Military pressure, particularly civil war, generated fiscal demands that led to the overissuance of money. By the time that the Yuan regime collapsed around 1368, paper money in circulation was worth more than 170 million ding of zhongtong chao, compared with less than 2 million ding zhongtong chao when the Mongols had proclaimed dominance over the whole of China around a century earlier, in 1271, from 2 million to 170 million. An 500% increase in the money supply over roughly a century, and the result was total collapse. Paper money had become worthless by the time the Ming Dynasty toppled the Yuan in 1368. By that time, most towns, prefectures, counties, and cities had reverted to a barter economy. The world's most advanced monetary system reduced an empire to bartering grain for tools. Centuries of financial innovation erased, the infrastructure of commerce gone. The trust that held the system together destroyed. And it did not stop there. You would think the Ming Dynasty would have learned. Their founder, Zhu Yuanzhang, was a penniless peasant who rose to power during the collapse of the Yuan. He lived through the hyperinflation. He saw what unbacked paper did to an empire. Founder of the Ming Dynasty, Hongwu sought to eliminate silver from the market due to his fear of inflation, which he previously experienced under the Yuan Dynasty. His attempt involved imposing harsh limits on silver mining to stop its flow into the market, and subsequently replaced it with baochao, or paper money. Hongwu feared inflation so much that he banned the metal that had replaced the failed paper. Then he introduced his own paper, the Da Ming Baochao, the Great Ming Treasure Note. The Great Ming Treasure Note was not backed by any forms of hard currency or reserves, and the government never set any limitations on their production. These circumstances led the paper currency of the Ming Dynasty to suffer from inflation. No backing, no production limits. The Ming made every mistake the Yuan had made from day one. They skipped the stages entirely. Where the Yuan, at least, started with silver convertibility, the Ming launched straight into unbacked paper. As the first credit currency in the Ming Dynasty, the Ming Baoqiao had no fixed issuance limit and no clear issuance reserve. The results were predictable. In the 23rd year of Hongwu, 1391, the face value of Baoqiao depreciated to 1/4 of the original regulations. Within 23 years, 75% of the value was gone. Fiscal mismanagement, notably the failure to collect taxes and paper money, caused severe depreciation, and by the early 15th century, Ming paper money was largely defunct. The Baoqiao notes proved an abject failure, and by 1425, they ceased to function as viable currency. 57 years. That is how long the Ming paper money lasted before it died completely, from 1368 to 1425. Less than a human lifetime. But here is the part of the story that matters most for your life today. The people refused. Regardless of the silver prohibition, the citizens continued to use silver and bronze coins in defiance of the emperor. When the citizens of the Ming Dynasty continued to use silver in defiance of paper money mandates, the state backed down. The government said, use our paper. The people said, no. They chose silver. They chose metal they could hold, weigh, and verify. They chose money that no printing press could dilute. In the Empire of Silver, Jin Shu explains that this was because government officials were unhappy that their salaries were being paid in rapidly devaluing currency. In terms of official salaries, Ming Dynasty officials, who ranked among the interest class, were at first paid in paper currency, but salaries shrank due to inflation. When the government's own employees refused to be paid in the government's own money, the experiment was over. The government was forced to recognize this reality and accepted that their money had failed. The Ming Dynasty then went on to a silver standard. After various status changes in China's history, silver played a more important role in the market and became a dominant currency in China in the 1540s. The market value of silver in the Ming territory was double its value elsewhere, which provided great arbitrage profit for the Europeans and Japanese. China's hunger for silver reshaped global trade. The high price of silver in China drove the Spanish to exploit their Andean and Mexican mines for all they were worth, to develop complex systems to provide those mines with labor, and to establish a colony in the Philippines, nearly 9,000 miles away from its port in Acapulco to access the Chinese market. The result was that the Ming Dynasty got its silver, and Spain became for a time the great European world power. One dynasty's monetary failure reshaped the entire global economy. The Spanish Empire, the Manila galleon trade, the silver mines of Potosi, all of it traces back to Chinese citizens refusing their government's paper. 3 dynasties, one pattern, every time. The Song created paper money backed by metal reserves. They faced military pressure. They printed to fund defense. The currency collapsed. The dynasty fell. The Yuan inherited the system. They improved it with a silver standard. They maintained discipline for 50 years. Then war and fiscal pressure forced overprinting. The paper money in Yuan China experienced 3 stages: the stability of monetary value, inflation, and then hyperinflation. This experience is generalized to other dynasties. The currency collapsed. The dynasty fell. The Ming launched unbacked paper from day one. The currency collapsed in under 60 years. The people abandoned it for silver. The dynasty was forced to accept their paper had failed. During the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties, China attempted to skip the silver standard and proceed straight to the paper currency standard, but lack of restraint defeated the premature advent of paper currency. 5 words contain the entire lesson. Lack of restraint defeated it. The mechanism is the same every time. As shown in the history of the Yuan dynasty, this process is decomposed into 2 steps. First, the government misappropriated metal reserves for the purpose of funding deficits. Second, it issued more paper money than the reserves could support to obtain seigniorage revenue. Once the first step began, the easing of the constraints from the reserve resulted in the second step happening automatically. Once paper money was overissued, the monetary system would enter into inflation and even hyperinflation, and collapse was ultimately inevitable. Step 1, raid the reserves. Step 2, print without limit. The first step makes the second step inevitable. Once the anchor is gone, the press runs free. China's historical experience underscores that economic prosperity hinges on the effective execution of sound policies, a process influenced by the political landscape. That is the diplomatic version. The blunt version: when politics controls the money supply serves politics until it serves no one. Now apply this to your world. Federal debt held by the public is near 100% of GDP. Annual deficits are projected to remain elevated for the foreseeable future, driven by structural imbalances, entitlement spending, demographic pressures, and insufficient revenues. With the low interest rates of the 2010s behind us for the foreseeable future, interest payments on the debt are becoming one of the fastest growing components of federal spending. When rates rise, the Treasury must refinance maturing debt at higher yields. Higher yields mean higher annual interest costs. Higher interest costs mean larger deficits, which require more borrowing. The problem compounds. This is the spiral. This is the same machine that destroyed the Yuan Dynasty's monetary system, running in a modern economy. Fiscal dominance flips the relationship between fiscal and monetary policy. It occurs when large government deficits and debt burdens constrain the central bank's choices. Instead of focusing on price stability, the central bank must consider the government's financing needs. Major monetary tightening might restore price stability, but it also drives up debt service costs. If deficits are large enough and persistent enough, monetary policy becomes collateral damage. When the Song Dynasty faced Mongol invasion, the government's need for military funding overrode monetary discipline. When the Yuan Dynasty faced civil war, the government's need for fiscal revenue overrode silver convertibility. The pattern is fiscal pressure forcing monetary expansion. The result is always debasement. In the most extreme case, the government or Federal Reserve could monetize the debt, explicitly or implicitly printing money to finance the debt. In addition to purchasing existing Treasury securities, printed money could be used to fund interest and principal payments or to issue additional government debt without requiring outside buyers. We watched this happen in real time. In 2020 and 2021, Congress enacted extraordinary pandemic relief packages totaling trillions of dollars. Deficits reached levels not seen outside of world wars. At the same time, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet, purchasing massive quantities of Treasury securities. The central bank defended these actions as necessary to stabilize financial markets. The result, combined with supply constraints and stimulus checks, was predictable. Inflation climbed to 9% by mid-2022, the highest in 4 decades. The Song printed for defense, the Yuan printed for deficits, the Ming printed without any anchor at all. The United States printed for a pandemic and saw 9% inflation within 2 years. The timeline compresses with each repetition. The Song monetary experiment lasted over 2 centuries. The Yuan's silver-backed system lasted 108 years. The Ming's paper lasted 57 years. The modern fiat experiment, unanchored since 1971, is now 55 years old. And here is the lesson the Ming Dynasty burned into the historical record. The government had banned silver and decreed that the citizens should use devaluing paper currency. The citizens continued to use silver and refused to use the paper money. The government was forced to recognize this reality and accepted that their money had failed. When trust dies, no law, no decree, no penalty can force people to accept worthless paper. The Ming tried. They failed. The citizens chose their own money. The government followed, not led. The question for your generation is the same question every generation in China faced for 500 years. Does the government that controls the printing press have the discipline to stop printing? The Song did not. The Yuan did not. The Ming did not. In the 1,000-year struggle between silver and paper currency, from the time that paper currency was invented in the 11th century until the end of the 20th century reforms, silver's victory was the government's defeat, and silver's defeat was also the government's defeat. It was human greed, and even more a major systemic failure. 500 years of Chinese monetary history produced one finding. Paper money works when discipline holds. It destroys everything it touches when discipline fails. That finding is not ancient history. It is your budget. It is your rent. It is the price of your groceries. It is the purchasing power leaking out of your savings account every single month. The machinery is the same. The press is the same. The incentives are the same. The only variable is time. And time, as 3 Chinese dynasties learned, always runs out.